My name is Eleanor Voss, and I want to tell you about the night my husband of 22 years slapped me across the face in front of 11 people, and how 4 words I said afterward ended everything he thought he'd built. But first, let me put you in the room. The private dining room at Hargrove's smells the way it always has. Cedar paneling, warm bread, the faint ghost of someone else's celebration. We come here every year on the 14th. We have a standing reservation. The staff knows us by name. Richard always orders the burgundy before we've even been seated because he likes people to see him as a man who already knows what he wants. There are 11 guests tonight. Friends, mostly his, 2 of mine. The table is set with the good china the restaurant keeps for private occasions, and someone has put a small arrangement of white dahlias in the center, which I requested, because dahlias were my mother's flower, and this room has always been where I bring the things I want to keep safe. The conversation is warm. Richard is performing well. He always performs well in front of an audience. He's telling a story about a fishing trip, gesturing broadly, and the table is laughing at the right moments, and I'm watching his hands the way I have watched hands across conference tables for 30 years, reading the tension before it arrives. I correct him. It is a small correction. A factual one. Something about the lake house. A date, a detail. Said quietly, with no edge in my voice, because I am not trying to start anything. I'm simply telling the truth, which, I have learned, is sometimes the most dangerous thing a woman can do at a dinner table. His face changes. I have seen that face before. Not on him. On others. In rooms designed for exactly this kind of unraveling. And then his hand moves. The sound is very sharp in a small room. The table goes silent in the specific way that rooms go silent when something has happened that cannot be unhappened. I do not cry. I do not reach for my cheek. I set my napkin on the table, fold it once, neatly, the way my mother taught me, and I look at my husband of 22 years, and I say 4 words. But to understand what those words were, and why they worked, you need to understand what this marriage looked like before that dinner, and what I had been doing for the 3 weeks before it. Before I go any further, let me say this plainly. The names in this story have been changed. The places have been softened around the edges. A few details have been rearranged to protect people who do not deserve protection, but whose children might someday look this up. This is my story. I lived it. And I'm telling it now because someone listening to me tonight is sitting with something they cannot yet name, and I want them to hear how it ends. That is the only reason I'm in this room with you. If this story finds you, and I believe it will find exactly who it's meant to find, drop your city or country in the comments below. Just that. Your city, your country, 1 line. I want to know how far a quiet woman's voice can travel. Now, let me tell you what this marriage used to look like. Richard Voss was not the kind of man you noticed immediately. He was not the loudest voice in the room, not the best dressed, not the one with the story that stopped conversations. He was the man standing slightly to the left of all of that, warm, attentive, asking the question that made you feel like the most interesting person in the building. That was his gift, not performance, presence. I was 26 when I met him at a conference in Cincinnati. A forensic accounting seminar which tells you everything you need to know about who I was at 26. I had spent 4 years by then learning how to find what people hid in numbers, how to read a balance sheet the way other people read faces, how to locate the one figure in a column of hundreds that doesn't belong, the one that sits slightly wrong, like a word misspelled in a sentence you've read 100 times. I was very good at it. Richard sold commercial insurance. He was 31, recently divorced, no children, and he had the particular steadiness of a man who had already survived something difficult and come out the other side without bitterness. That was what I fell in love with first. Not his face, not his charm, but the absence of bitterness. I had seen enough bitter men in depositions to know how rare that was. We married 18 months later. Small ceremony. My father walked me down the aisle and shook Richard's hand at the bottom and said quietly, the way my father said everything, "She finds things, Richard. Remember that. Richard laughed. We all did. The anniversary book was my idea in the 3rd year of our marriage. It is exactly what it sounds like. A large, cloth-bound ledger, the kind you'd find in an old accounting office, because I have always believed that love, like money, needs to be recorded to be real. Every year, on the 14th, we each wrote one entry. Not a letter to each other. An entry. Date, location, one memory from the previous year that we wanted to keep. Sometimes it was a sentence. Sometimes it was half a page. Richard's handwriting is large and slightly uneven, and reading his entries over the years is like listening to him talk, unhurried, occasionally funny, always specific in the details that matter to him. 22 entries each. 44 pages of a life. I kept the book in the top drawer of my writing desk, which I considered a safe place because it was mine, in the way that very few things in a shared life remain entirely yours. My father died in the 14th year of our marriage and left me a trust. Not a dramatic sum. He was a careful man, not a wealthy one, but enough. Enough to matter. Enough that Richard, from the night we received the paperwork, began referring to it as our safety net. I noticed that. I filed it the way I file things, not in a drawer, but in the part of my mind where I keep information I'm not ready to act on yet. A forensic accountant does not discard data. She waits for it to mean something. For years, it meant nothing. Richard was generous, steady, present. The trust sat in my name, in my account, and he never asked for access and I never offered it. We were comfortable. We were, I believed, honest with each other in the ways that counted. I believed that for a long time. I want you to remember the book. The ledger. 44 pages of a life we wrote together. You'll need to remember it later. It started, as these things always do, with something reasonable. Richard brought it up on a Sunday morning in March. Coffee on the table, newspaper folded beside his cup, the particular domestic ease of a morning that has no agenda. He said he'd been thinking about the estate, about simplifying things, about making sure that if anything happened to either of us, the other one wouldn't be left navigating a maze of paperwork alone. "We're not young anymore, Eleanor," he said. Not unkindly, in the tone of a man who has been thinking about something responsible and wants credit for the thinking. I told him I'd look into it. That was true. I did intend to look into it. A forensic accountant does not dismiss estate planning as a manipulation tactic based on one Sunday morning conversation. She files the information, notes the date, and waits to see if it has siblings. It had siblings. 3 weeks later, our son Adam drove up from the city with Claire, his wife of 4 years, and a manila folder he set on the kitchen counter with the careful casualness of someone who has practiced the gesture. Adam is Richard's son from his first marriage. I have known him since he was 19, helped pay for his graduate degree, attended his wedding in the front row because he asked me to, specifically, and I was moved by that, and I want you to know I was moved by that because it matters for what comes later. The folder contained documents from an estate attorney I did not recognize, a proposed restructuring of our shared assets, a new framework for the trust, my father's trust still in my name, that would fold it into a joint family account for, as Adam explained with his hands open on the table, the way people gesture when they want to appear to have nothing to hide. Easier management going forward. I asked who the attorney was. Adam said Richard had found him. Someone highly recommended. I asked Richard across the table if we could discuss it first. Just the two of us. He said, of course, absolutely. No rush at all. He said that in front of Adam and Claire, which I noted. The comments about my memory began the following month, and they began with Claire. It was never direct. Claire is not a direct person. She is the kind of person who delivers a blade and then looks surprised to find it in her hand. It was always contextual, always in front of others, always in the register of tender concern rather than accusation. Eleanor, you mentioned that last week, and don't you remember? She's been a little scattered lately. We've all noticed. It's nothing to worry about. Richard says she's been forgetting appointments. I think it's just the stress of getting older, honestly. I heard the third one from my neighbor, Patricia, who repeated it with the gentle discomfort of someone delivering news they didn't ask to carry. Claire had said it at a dinner party I hadn't attended. A dinner party hosted by mutual friends who now looked at me, when I saw them, with the particular softness people reserve for those they've been told are struggling. A narrative was being built. I recognized the architecture immediately. I had seen it constructed before, in other contexts, around other people. It is a specific kind of project. It requires consistent repetition, sympathetic delivery, and an audience that has no reason to question the source. It requires, above all, that the subject not realize it's happening until the structure is already load-bearing. I said nothing. I want to be precise about that. I said nothing, not because I was confused or frightened or unaware. I said nothing because I am a forensic accountant, and a forensic accountant knows that the worst thing you can do when you've found an irregularity is let the numbers know you've seen them. I smiled at the right moments. I let one or two small things slide in conversation. A date, a name, nothing consequential, because I wanted to see what they would do with the room if they thought they had it. They took it immediately. That told me everything I needed to know about how long they'd been waiting. I found it because of the anniversary book. That is the detail I return to most often, even now. That the thing meant to protect our history was what led me to its unraveling. I was looking for last year's entry, which I had tucked into the back of the ledger for safekeeping, and in pulling the book from my writing desk I disturbed a folder underneath it that I did not recognize. A brown accordion folder, the kind Richard uses for active documents, sitting in a drawer I considered mine in the way I had always considered certain things mine, not by agreement, but by quiet assumption. I am a forensic accountant. I do not leave unrecognized folders unopened. The first document was a trust amendment. 12 pages, formal, fully executed, meaning signed, witnessed, and notarized, on a date 14 weeks prior. The language was dense in the way that legal language is dense when it is trying to accomplish something specific without appearing to. But I have spent 30 years reading documents designed to obscure, and the substance was not difficult to locate. My father's trust, the one he left to me, in my name, the one Richard had called our safety net for 22 years, had been amended to transfer primary control to a joint account held by Richard and Adam Voss upon, and I am reading this exactly as it was written. Evidence of Eleanor Voss's diminished capacity to manage her own financial affairs, as determined by 2 licensed medical professionals. I read that sentence 4 times, not because I didn't understand it, because I wanted to make sure I understood it completely before I allowed myself to feel anything about it. There was a signature line for me at the bottom of the amendment. It was blank, which meant one of 2 things. Either they hadn't gotten to that step yet, or they intended to get there in a way that did not require my actual, informed consent. I photographed every page. I replaced the folder exactly as I'd found it. Same angle, same depth in the drawer, the edge aligned with the seam. A forensic accountant knows that the most dangerous thing you can do with evidence is let the subject know it's been touched. The bank statement was in the same folder, clipped behind the trust documents. It was not our joint account. I would have seen that in our regular reviews. It was an account I had not known existed, in Richard's name only, at a bank we did not use. 18 months of statements. I did not have time to photograph every page, so I focused on the pattern. Because in 30 years of forensic accounting, I have learned that the story is never in a single number. It is always in the shape of them, the rhythm, the repetition. The payments went to an LLC. The LLC was called Vanessa Consulting Group. The amounts were not small. The intervals were not irregular. They had the cadence of a retainer, the same figure within a narrow range every 4 to 6 weeks for 14 months. I wrote the LLC name in the margin of my own notebook, which I keep in my cardigan pocket because old habits do not leave a forensic accountant even in her own home. I looked up Vanessa Consulting Group that evening on my laptop, in my writing room with the door closed. It had a website, a single page, a phone number. a photograph of a woman, late 30s, professional headshot. The kind of photograph that is designed to suggest credibility without providing it. No listed clients, no described services, no verifiable credentials. I sat with that for a long time. I want to tell you what I felt sitting at that desk with my father's anniversary book in the drawer below me and my husband's other life on the screen in front of me. I felt very clear, not cold, not shattered. Clear. In the way a room becomes clear when you finally open the window you'd been told was painted shut. I picked up my phone and I called Miriam. Miriam answered on the second ring, which is how she has always answered. Not because she was waiting, but because she does not believe in making people wait for things that matter. We had worked adjacent to each other for 11 years before she retired from litigation and opened her own estate practice. I had referred cases to her. She had called me on 3 separate occasions when a balance sheet in a contested estate looked wrong, in a way she couldn't name, but I could. We had the kind of professional friendship that does not require maintenance. You can set it down for 2 years and pick it up without rust. I told her what I had found, all of it, the trust amendment, the blank signature line, the LLC, the 14 months of payments at regular intervals. I read her the exact language about diminished capacity. I did not editorialize. I gave her the documents the way I would give a colleague a balance sheet, clean, sequenced, without my feelings attached, because my feelings were not the relevant data. Miriam was quiet for a moment after I finished. Then she said, "Eleanor, that amendment isn't valid." She explained why. The specific procedural failures, the notifications that had not been sent, the signatures that were missing in ways that mattered legally. The document had been prepared, she believed, by someone who understood estate law well enough to draft the language, but not well enough to execute it correctly. It was, she said, a serious attempt that had not yet become a serious problem. Yet being the word she emphasized because without intervention, it would eventually become exactly that. I asked her what she needed from me. She told me. I listened carefully and did not write anything down because I did not want a record of this conversation in my own handwriting in my own home. When we finished, I sat for a moment with the phone in my lap. I want to be precise about the decision I made that night, because I have thought about it many times since, and I believe it was the right one, and I want you to understand why. I did not confront Richard. A forensic accountant does not confront an irregularity before she understands its full shape. A confrontation tells the subject what you know, which immediately tells them what you don't know, which gives them time to move what hasn't been found yet. I had found the edge of something, I had not yet found the center. So I made a different choice. If Richard and Adam and Claire needed Eleanor Voss to be slipping, if they had spent months building that architecture, repeating it to neighbors and friends, laying the groundwork for 2 medical professionals to confirm what they'd already decided was true, then I would give them Eleanor Voss slipping. I would forget a dinner reservation. I would mix up a date in conversation. I would leave a question slightly unanswered. Let a silence run a beat too long. Respond to Claire's little comments with the vague, unthreatening smile of a woman who is not quite keeping up. I would give them exactly what they needed to stop watching me. And while they were watching that, I would be doing something else entirely. The anniversary dinner was 6 weeks away. I had decided, before I set the phone down, that it would be the room where this ended. Not because I am a dramatic woman, I'm not, but because that room was mine. I had built it. I had maintained it for 22 years. I had brought my mother's flowers into it every year because I believed it was a safe place. It was time to find out if I was right about that. I want to tell you what it costs, performing confusion when your mind is perfectly clear. It is not the acting that is difficult. The acting is straightforward. A slight hesitation before a name, a vague look when a specific answer is expected, the occasional repetition of a question just asked. These are small things. I had watched Claire deploy a version of this performance herself, the gentle befuddlement of a woman who wants to seem harmless, and I'm a quick study. What costs something is the patience. Sitting across a dinner table from your husband while he explains slowly a financial matter you understood before he finished his first sentence. Nodding at the right intervals. Letting him feel the particular satisfaction of a man who believes he is managing a situation that has already been decided. That requires a quality of stillness that I had spent 30 years developing in mediation rooms, and I was grateful, in a grim way, to finally have a personal use for it. Miriam had connected me with a colleague of hers, a former litigation support specialist named Daniel, who now ran a small private consultancy, the kind that does not advertise. He provided me with a voice recorder no larger than a pen cap, which I kept in the same cardigan pocket as my notebook. He also provided me with access to a forensic data service that could trace the full ownership structure of an LLC, given its registration number, which I had found in the State Business Registry in 11 minutes on a Tuesday afternoon while Richard was playing golf. Vanessa Consulting Group was registered to a Vanessa Lee Marsh. Age 37. A residential address in a suburb 40 minutes from our home. A previous business registration. Dissolved in Richard's name as co-owner. I wrote that down in my notebook. I underlined it once. I did not underline it twice because I have never been a woman who underlines things twice. The recordings accumulated over 4 weeks. Richard and Adam were not careful around me. They had stopped being careful around me, which was exactly what I had needed them to do. They spoke in the kitchen while I was, as far as they knew, reading in the next room. They spoke in Richard's study with the door half closed. They spoke on the back porch on a Sunday afternoon while I sat inside with my tea. The window behind me opened 2 inches, which was enough. I did not record everything. A forensic accountant is selective. You do not need the whole river, only the specific currents that tell you where it's going. I needed 3 things on record. I got all 3. I needed Richard confirming that the trust amendment was intentional and that the incompetency filing was planned rather than contingent. That they were not waiting to see if I declined, but had already decided to assert that I had. I got that on a Thursday. I needed Adam discussing the timeline. Specifically, that they had chosen the anniversary dinner as the date to present me with the signature page because, as he said, and I am quoting precisely because, precision matters. She'll be emotional. She'll want the night to go well. She'll sign. I got that on a Sunday. I needed something that connected Richard directly to Vanessa Marsh in a context that was not professional. I got that on a Wednesday evening when Richard, believing I'd gone to bed early, made a phone call in the kitchen that lasted 41 minutes and contained enough to establish unambiguously the nature of the relationship. I did not feel what you might expect me to feel when I heard that call. I had by then already grieved the marriage I thought I had. What I felt instead was the particular cold clarity of a case coming into full resolution. Every figure in the column accounted for, the discrepancy named, the source located. I called Miriam the next morning and told her we were ready. She confirmed that the trust had been successfully transferred into a protected account in my name only, a process finalized quietly, legally, 10 days earlier, without Richard's knowledge or requirement, because it had always been mine to protect, and I had simply never needed to. Then I called the restaurant and confirmed our reservation for the 14th. Private room, 11 guests, white dahlias for the center of the table, and 1 folder which Miriam would carry, because I intended to keep my hands free. The dinner began the way it always began. Richard ordered the burgundy before we were seated. The staff greeted us by name. Someone had placed white dahlias in the center of the table, exactly as I had requested, and I touched 1 petal briefly as I sat down. Not for comfort, but to confirm that everything in this room was where I had put it. 11 guests. Miriam to my left, her briefcase on the floor beside her chair. Unremarked upon, because Miriam is the kind of woman who carries a briefcase the way other women carry a handbag, as though it has always been there, and its contents are no one's business. My daughter Sylvia to my right, who knew only that I had asked her to come and that it mattered, and who had not asked me to explain further because she has known me long enough to understand that I explain things when I am ready. Richard was warm. He was funny. He told the fishing story again, the one the table had half heard before, and people laughed at the right moments, and I watched his hands, and I watched Adam across the table, who was watching me in the way a man watches something he believes he has already resolved. We were 3 courses in when Richard stood. He framed it as a toast. That is the detail I want you to hold, that he framed it as a toast with his glass raised and his voice warm, and the table already smiling in anticipation of something celebratory, because that is how it was designed to feel. A celebration of 22 years of partnership, a formality really, something they'd been meaning to do to make sure everything was in order for both their sakes. Adam slid the folder across the table towards me, signature page on top. A pen placed beside it, not handed to me, placed. The way you place something in front of someone who you expect to simply comply. I looked at the folder. I looked at the pen. I looked at Richard, who was still standing, still holding his glass, still performing the toast, and I said, clearly and without any particular emphasis, as though I were identifying a line item in a balance sheet that didn't belong. Before I sign anything, I'd like to know whether Vanessa Marsh will be contributing to the joint account or whether that arrangement remains separate. The table went very quiet. Richard's glass came down. I watched his face move through its phases. Surprise, calculation, the specific rearrangement that happens when a man realizes the room he thought he controlled has shifted under him. And then something I had not seen on his face before, not in 22 years. Something that was not calculated at all. He told me I didn't know what I was talking about. I said I had 14 months of wire transfer records that suggested otherwise. He said I was confused, that this was exactly what he'd been worried about, that I wasn't well, that everyone at the table could see it, that this was precisely why they needed the paperwork signed, for my own protection, for my own good. He said it to the table, not to me, because it was never for my benefit. It was always a performance for an audience. And then, when I did not look away, when I did not lower my voice or reach for the pen or give him the room back, his hand moved. The sound was very sharp. I have described what followed before, at the beginning of this story, but I want to give it to you now in full. I did not reach for my cheek. I set my napkin on the table, folded it once, and looked at my husband of 22 years. I said, "Miriam, show them." Miriam placed the briefcase on the table and opened it with the particular calm of a woman who has waited a very long time to open a specific door. What came out? The trust amendment and its procedural failures annotated. The 14 months of wire transfers to Vanessa Consulting Group, cross-referenced with the LLC registration listing Richard as former co-owner. 3 recordings, time-stamped, which Miriam's colleague played from a small device. Richard's voice, Adam's voice, the 41-minute call on a Wednesday evening, and the divorce filing. Already submitted, already assigned a case number. Those were the 4 words. Not a threat, not a plea. A past tense. Something already done, already real, already beyond the reach of his management. I watched Adam look at his father. I watched Richard look at the table. I watched Sylvia, my daughter, who had come because I asked her to and not asked me why, reach across and put her hand over mine. The dahlias were still in the center of the table. White, my mother's flower, in the room I had always called safe. I had been right about that. The days after the dinner were not dramatic. I want to say that plainly because I think there is an expectation. After a moment like that one, after a room goes that quiet and evidence comes out of a briefcase onto a white tablecloth, that what follows should match the intensity. That there should be a confrontation, a breakdown, a scene worthy of what preceded it. There was not. What there was paperwork. And I've always been more comfortable with paperwork than with scenes. The prenuptial agreement was 22 years old and had been drafted, at my insistence, by an attorney Richard had considered overly cautious at the time. He had signed it without significant objection. I think he believed, as many people believe about protective documents, that it was a formality for other people's marriages. The kind of thing you sign to be agreeable and never expect to need. He needed it. The agreement was specific about my father's trust, specific in the way that a forensic accountant who helped draft her own prenuptial agreement tends to be specific. It was mine. It had always been mine. It would remain mine regardless of the duration or dissolution of the marriage, and no amendment to its structure required or could legally incorporate Richard's consent. Miriam filed the paperwork to void the trust amendment within 72 hours of the dinner. The procedural failures she had identified weeks earlier, the missing notifications, the absent signatures, the incorrect witnessing, meant the amendment had never been legally valid. It was voided without contest, because there was no legal ground from which to contest it. My father's trust returned to exactly what it had always been. His money held for his daughter, exactly as he had intended. The question of criminal exposure took longer and moved the way legal processes move. Not in dramatic declarations, but in letters, and then in formal notices, and then in a meeting I did not attend, but which Miriam attended on my behalf, and reported back to me in the precise, unhurried way I had come to rely on. Elder financial abuse carries specific statutes in our state. The combination of the fraudulent trust amendment, the documented plan to have me declared incompetent for financial gain, and the recordings, which established premeditation clearly enough that Miriam's colleague described them as a prosecutor's ideal evidence, constituted a case that the relevant authorities found straightforward to open. Richard retained an attorney within 48 hours of the dinner. Adam retained a separate attorney, which Miriam told me was, professionally speaking, the first intelligent decision either of them had made throughout this entire process. Claire called me 9 days after the dinner. I want to be precise about this. She did not call to apologize. She called to explain, to walk me through her understanding of events in a way that positioned her as peripheral, as someone who had been present but not complicit, as a woman who had perhaps been more aware than she should have been but who had never, she wanted me to understand, been the one to initiate anything. I listened to the full explanation. Then I told her that I appreciated the call, that I wished her well, and that any further communication should be directed to Miriam. I did not tell her that the recording from the Sunday afternoon on the back porch included her voice as well as Adam's. Miriam had advised me to let that emerge through the appropriate channels, and I have always respected good professional advice. Richard's last direct communication to me came through his attorney, in a letter 3 weeks after the dinner. He wanted me to know that everything he had done had been for the family's future, that he had watched me. And here I am, reading the letter's language exactly. Struggle, in ways I wasn't ready to name. And that he had been trying to protect me, in his way, imperfectly perhaps, but with genuine concern for my well-being. I read the letter twice. Then I scanned it and sent it to Miriam with a single note. Add it to the file, because a forensic accountant knows that a man who puts his justifications in writing has not been advised well. And because I had learned over 22 years that Richard had always believed his explanations were more powerful than other people's evidence, he had simply never been on the other side of my evidence before. The friends came back quietly, the way people return to things they should not have left, without announcing it, without quite acknowledging the gap. Patricia called about something unrelated and stayed on the phone for an hour. 2 couples from the dinner wrote notes, handwritten, which I kept not out of sentiment, but because I have learned that the people who put things in writing are the people who mean them. The ones who did not reach out, I noted, and released. A forensic accountant knows which figures belong in the final column and which ones simply don't balance. The house is quieter now. I want to tell you that I mean that as a complaint, but I don't. The quiet is mine. I chose it, the way I have chosen most things in my life. Deliberately, after consideration, without apology. There is a difference between a house that is quiet because something has been taken from it, and a house that is quiet because it has finally been returned to itself. This house is the second kind. The anniversary book is on the shelf above my writing desk. I moved it there from the drawer. It deserved a shelf, I decided, not a drawer. And I kept all 22 of Richard's entries intact, because removing them would have been a kind of falsification. And I have spent my entire career in opposition to falsification. The entries are what they are. They were written by a man I believed I knew, and perhaps some version of that man existed when he wrote them, and perhaps he didn't. And I have made my peace with not being certain. What I added was a final entry. My handwriting, my words, the date of the anniversary dinner at the top of the page. It is 2 sentences long. I will not read it to you. It is private in the way that some things must remain private. But I will tell you that it ends the book correctly. Not happily, necessarily. Correctly. Which I have come to understand is a different thing, and a more durable one. The dahlias on my kitchen table are fresh. I buy them myself now, every week, because they were always my mother's flower, and I see no reason to reserve them for special occasions any longer. There is no special occasion more worth marking than an ordinary Thursday, on which you are alive and clear-minded and entirely, legally, irrevocably yourself. I have thought a great deal in these quieter months about what I would say if I could sit across from the woman I was at the beginning of all this. The woman who noticed the folder on a Sunday morning and filed it without acting, who heard her memory questioned at a dinner party and smiled without correcting it, who loved a man for 22 years and called that trust when some of it was simply inattention. I would tell her this. Patience is not the same thing as passivity. One is a strategy, the other is a surrender. Know which one you're practicing. And I would tell her, there is a particular kind of strength in allowing someone to underestimate you, but only if you are using the time they give you. Silence is not weakness. Silence is the sound of someone doing something you haven't seen yet. And finally, and this is the one I want you to carry with you, wherever you are, whatever city or country you wrote in the comments below. Love should never require your signature to prove it. If someone needs you diminished in order to feel secure, they are not loving you. They are managing you. And you were not built to be managed. You were built to find things, whatever they told you otherwise, whatever paperwork they prepared, whatever narrative they rehearsed, whatever room they tried to take from you. I want you to remember that. You were built to find things. And the most important thing you will ever find is the evidence of your own worth, sitting in plain sight, waiting for you to stop doubting it long enough to pick it up. Thank you for sitting with me tonight. If this story found the person it was meant for, and I believe it did, please like this video and subscribe so you don't miss what I share next. And leave me a comment. Not just your city this time, but one word. The word you're leaving this story with. I'll be reading every one.